Hi everyone, this is Yuri from ORIL, and it means that we are looking at me and our guest in our studio at this week at our Amazing Innovation Blueprint podcast with ORIL. And our today's guest is Michael Broder. Yay, Michael, nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And my pleasure too. So, Michael is CEO of a very interesting firm in the prop tech domain. The name of the company, RCKRBX. Michael, for me, that sounds like something like CP3AO or I don't know what is that. Can you please explain me? Because for me, that sounds like something from Star Wars. And what do you guys do? Because we're not in the Star Wars, we're in the prop tech and the real estate. Tell us about the company and where this name came from.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me today, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak to your viewers and audience. It's an interesting story about where our name came from. We're a tech company, so we don't believe in vowels. So the name RCKRBX really says Rocker Box, and
that's much easier.
Yes, Rocker Box. But Rocker Box was the name really came from looking back into history and back in the gold rush days of the early 49ers. And a rocker box was a device. Basically, it looked like a square box with some mesh in it. And think of rocking chair feet, legs. And that's what they used to use to separate gold nuggets from the gravel and the rest of the dirt that they were digging up. And if today data and decision intelligence is the world's new currency, hence the name Rockerbox.
Okay, that's actually a pretty cool analogy. I really love it. And can you please tell me where the idea, not just of the name, but of the company and the services that you guys provide came from? Is that was some specific situation, or you just analyzed the market? How did you guys start it?
So I used to run a consulting company called Brightline Strategies for 24 years. And myself and my business partner and our chief research officer of Brightline, after years of doing custom research in the real estate industry and other sectors, what we began to realize is the kind of data and actionable decision intelligence that we were generating for our clientele had there was a growing need in the real estate market to begin to deliver that in a more accessible way for all those in the industry. Because our data, what is distinctive about what we do is we speak to thousands and thousands and thousands of people in any market that we deploy into. Now, back in the consulting days, these were custom one-off projects where a large real estate company who may be seeking to make some significant investments in a market or looking to buy an existing asset or build a ground up new property, build a new development project, they would come to us to help them understand what were those market dynamics. And because our data, unlike 99% of all real estate data, which is backward looking, whether it's supply side information, market comps, contextual market information, that's all retrospective and contextual data. Our data, because it comes from the end, directly from the end users, and we're able to marry our information to leasing decision horizons, we can actually peer out over the horizon. We can look at any given point about 36 months into the future and understand how that market is going to evolve, how those renter populations are going to behave, what is driving their decision making in terms of where they choose to live, what they choose to live in, and how much they're willing to pay for those live spaces. And that's a very unique set of information when you're thinking about making an investment in a particular market or choosing one market over another. Another one may be if you're trying to understand the programmatic elements of a property, to understand what are the factors that are accretive to demand, lease likelihoods, and rent premiums. So making sure you're making the investments in the right places in terms of those programmatic elements, and not wasting dollars on things that don't move the proverbial needles in the renter decision making. And that's really the uniqueness of Rockerbox and our analytics. I should also mention that our backgrounds, myself, my co-founders, Jamie Moore and Kevin Hudak, our path into real estate is kind of an odd one. We were former political operatives. We worked at the national level of political campaigns, and primarily on the research and strategy side of political campaigns for many years before we actually launched our consulting company. And when you think about the kind of research that sophisticated political campaigns use, everything from understanding populations, their movement and malleability, and how do you understand who are your target audiences, what matters to them, how do you provide to them the right information or stimuli that actually causes them to move closer to you, and understanding to what extent all those factors influence those decisions. Well, imagine having that information at your disposal when you're evaluating a real estate investment or development project, and understanding how deep is that demand, among whom, what matters to those specific populations, how does that influence their decision making and the premiums they're willing to pay for what and why. All of that information has never really existed in the real estate world. It has always been, decisions have largely been based on backward-looking data, contextual data, and the developers or investors' own experience with a particular market or product sector. This now enables you to have the voice of the customer at your decision table across every single major decision gate throughout the project's life cycle. So it gives you a different perspective, and because it's forward-looking data, you're able to understand how that market is evolving, what kind of units will be in demand going forward, which ones won't. And so that enabling you to actually refine and optimize the programming and then on-market performance of an asset, that is what we do.
Okay, thank you. That was pretty open. The question of everything you said, that you guys collecting like a huge amount of data, they're from very different layers of the real estate world. And what is your target audience? Who is the main users of this data for you? Who are you guys aiming?
So when you think about a project's life cycle, from initial market evaluation and feasibility and investment due diligence, all the way through lease up, on market performance, and the management of that property over time, each of that entire spectrum, or that time horizon of that project life cycle, there are various people that are responsible for different decisions at different points in that life cycle. So for us, because our data has different applications to each of those decision gates, we work with everybody from the heads of investment or acquisition to the developers themselves, to brokerage community, particularly on the capital markets side of the house, to debt side lenders who want to evaluate an opportunity that's being presented to them, as well as equity partners or institutional capital, all the way through those responsible for go-to-market lease up, and the leasing agents and the marketing groups that are helping drive the performance of an asset once on market. So the populations that we service through the platform are really specific to those decision stages or project stages across the initial investment due diligence all the way through lease up and on-market performance. So, I mean, I could go into the specifics of each of those populations, but it's fairly obvious in terms of who they are with respect to those different stages of a project's life cycle.
Yeah, I'm talking about the data and displaying this data and analyzing this data, how that works from the technical perspective from your side. So you guys collecting all this data, you analyze it internally. Maybe you use some script for that. Maybe there's some specialist who does that and you just provide an output. Or can you please uncover that part a little bit to our listeners?
Sure. So there's a couple of parts to that answer to that question. The first is really how we generate our demand side polling data. It's interesting in the real estate world, many people use the word demand, but what they're really talking about is absorption, which is another backward looking indicator. When I refer to demand, I'm actually talking about the actual market appetite among the entire renter universe in a particular market or submarket or neighborhood. And what are they expressing for their needs and wants, priorities, preferences, et cetera, for their next live spaces. So when we deploy into a market, the very first thing that we do is we draw a boundary line around the greater metropolitan area of that market. And then within that boundary line, we have to understand what is the statistical significance that we need in terms of our polling samples to be representative of all of those populations down to the zip code level. So when we draw that radius around that metro area, we're actually looking at the zip code levels within that boundary radius to understand population densities by demographic strata. And that tells us in a particular zip code in that market, how many respondents to our surveys do we need across all those different demographic cohorts to be statistically powered and representative of all those populations in that zip code. And we do that for every zip code in that market. That now tells us we need 1,700 people in that metro market for that initial polling sample to deploy that market. So we go out, we have a lot of technology that enables us to recruit respondents through various, everything from computer-assisted telephone interviewing all the way through direct recruitment through social media. And we have technology that tracks people's online usage. So if somebody goes online looking for an apartment, we identify those digital footprints or that digital dust and actually try to randomly recruit them into the survey. And randomization is absolutely critical. It's a industry best practice standard in the research world. So we go out and recruit thousands of people in our surveys, and we tether all of our data to census geodemographics at the neighborhood level. So one of the reasons why our data is as powerful as it is because it's representative of all those populations. And then depending on the preferences and the psychographic characteristics of these renters beyond just their geodemographics, we're able to understand who in a particular market is actually more likely to consider and choose this property over that property. And what are the factors that are driving that decision? And how does that affect how much they're willing to pay for the desired unit that they're seeking going in their next live space, and where and why? And that is a fundamental set of information, particularly in today's world, given just how much oversupply there is in particular markets of particular unit types. People talk about oversupply as that's why the leasing velocity has maintained, because there hasn't been a lot of new development initiated in the past, call it 18 months, but there was a lot of new deliveries over the past 18 months. And one of the challenges that many of those properties that just came on market are facing is because they followed the traditional programmatic mix model where they identified their site, they looked at the comps around their project site, and they said, okay, if we build something similar to what exists in this comp set, we can assume a reasonably similar rate of return for that new asset. Mm-hmm. Well, the problem is demand has changed, and there's a whole host of environmental factors. And when I say environmental, I don't mean like the environment per se.
Yeah, I got it.
Market dynamics and renter dynamics that have changed so fundamentally since the pandemic that a lot of the units that used to be the the ones that would lease quickest for the highest rent per square foot yields are now completely out of favor. And the demand shift in terms of what people are looking for in their next live spaces and why they are looking for them has so fundamentally changed that all this oversupply of these smaller units are going to be extraordinarily difficult to lease up downstream. And if you had used our platform when you were developing those projects, you would have seen that data, because we can look out 36 months or further into the future and understand.
That's actually, thank you. That was actually my question regarding the geodemographics. How fast that changed, and how often do you need to guys rescrape this data, collect this data, analyze that, so your data will be up to date? It's not going to be something that's, I don't know, useless.
Yeah. So we, depending on the condition of a market, and what I mean by that, is it a high growth market? Is it a static market? Or is it a market in decline? That tells us what the updating frequency is in any markets that we cover. So in a high growth market like a Raleigh, Durham, or a Dallas, Texas, meaning there's a lot of movement of populations either migrating into the market or moving through within the market itself, we will update our polling data every 3 months. And so the data is very is not like static, right? It is dynamic in that we're updating the data sets regularly. In a static market, it tends to be every 6 months. And in a market in decline, it is usually in the 3 to 6 month window. We're just tracking market indicators to tell us, do we need to go back into the market? So for instance, Washington, D.C. right now, given what's happening with the federal government and the reduction in the labor force of the federal government and how that's impacting not just office properties, but also residential properties, even though that market may be falling due to all these new dynamics that are a result of some federal policies, we obviously need to understand how that is affecting the business climate and the real estate climate because of the effects of those government decisions. So that's an example of a market that has a need for more frequent updating because of a factor that is influencing the performance of that market that is not necessarily real estate related, in the sense that it's these decisions.
Yeah, we can see it right now in the market.
Yes, that's exactly right. So there are some cases where something happens that will cause us to update the data more frequently, because it's incredibly important for somebody to look in the data lake that we have when they're running scenarios. You can isolate time horizons in our platform, so you can actually see change over time and understand, well, this was what it used to be like, and this is what it's like today, given the data. And in the platform itself, to an earlier question you asked about the kind of data we generate and the insight that we deliver, the platform doesn't just rely solely on our polling data. That is what is unique about Rockerbox. That is the proprietary data of the Rockerbox platform. But we pair it with all sorts of other more traditional real estate market metrics. So we pair it with supply side information. We pair it with census data. We pair it with Bureau of Labor Statistics information, spatial AI data. I mean, just go down the list of all those different, what I call secondary source data sets, because they're not coming directly from a person. They're coming from a different source. So that you're able to actually understand, if you had a programmatic mix where you wanted to build 50% of your product as 1 bedrooms, and then you understand in that submarket, demand going forward for 1 bedrooms is, call it 15% of all the renters in that
doesn't make sense to do that.
And you look at your comp set and you now see that, let's say 35% is of your comp product are 1 bedrooms. That's telling you out of the gate, you already have a net negative demand curve of 20%, negative 20%. So why would you ever build that many one bedrooms when you already know there is so much oversupply currently among the very renters who are your high propensity targets for your property? And all you're doing when you add those additional one bedrooms is you're just further commoditizing the market, which then creates downward price pressure on the rents for that unit type, which is why concessions are being offered at such a rate today for the smaller units, because they're harder to move. There just isn't the demand that there once was for those units.
That's a lot of data, and that's very useful. And the question that I have, you've mentioned some AI data, and what does it mean that you guys pulling some AI analyzed data, or you using AI right now for your calculation? How familiar with AI in general? I'm talking not about you, but the company. I'm talking
Yeah.
about the Rockbox.
So the platform was built in a machine learning environment because of, you can imagine that just the vastness of our data lake, particularly on the polling side. It's millions and millions of data points that we have to process and analyze, and so we use machine learning to power our probability driven analytics. So think of them as predictive analytics. And then obviously the investment analytics in terms of how a property will perform over time and why. So there's a lot of that occurs with all of the data that we generate in our proprietary polling, as well as all the data that we ingest from other sources. And the system ingests all of that and then runs the models based on all of those different data connections. Right now, there is no what I call user-facing AI, in the sense of there isn't a natural language model in our platform where you can ask the platform, well, what does this mean? And it would just give you a natural language answer. That is actually coming. That is what we're about to initiate our third round of fundraising. And it's really designed for three primary things. One is to create some user-based AI interfaces, because a lot of people who are not familiar with demand side data, true demand side data, it will enable them to become more comfortable and know how to apply the information they are gaining from the platform into their own decision models. We also are looking to expand into about 25 additional markets this year, which will effectively bring us nationwide. And then the last piece is to add some additional AI capability on the back end of the platform, which I can't really go into because it's kind of the secret sauce of what we're doing. But suffice to say, we already leverage machine learning pretty significantly to process and analyze the data and provide the business intelligence that we do. But we're looking to take it to the next level in the next 8 to 10 months.
Yeah, that was actually my next question. You already answered that. Do you guys have a plans to implement something new, maybe AI based? And thank you for sharing that.
Yes, of course.
And talking about just the AI parts in your specific business, I'm wondering, how do you see the AI usage for the companies like yours, let's say in a few years? What do you think? Is that gonna help you to streamline the process, increase efficiency, or maybe AI will be able to replace the humans completely in this sector, and basically there's going to be just you running all the business by using that technologies? What is your perspective and point of view?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I have a couple of thoughts on that. Number one, obviously, we are still in a embryonic stage of artificial intelligence, right? The promise of what AI could ultimately, and when I say we, I don't mean just Rockerbox. I mean, the world, right, is now just really wrapping their heads and arms around the promise of what AI can do. And so I think there's still a lot of unknowns. But one thing that people often forget about AI, because it's the new shiny object, and you know what happens whenever there's a shiny object in a market, everybody gravitates to that shiny object.
Yeah,
what people,
golden rush.
That's right. But what people forget about AI is it's only as good as the information that feeds it. So if you have garbage data to begin with, and you put that into the AI model, it doesn't matter how good the AI is, you're still going to get garbage out. So I think people often forget that fundamental fact. And so for us, if you think about the world we operate in, all of our clients or customers are in the real estate world, and they build product to house people. We've always maintained, perhaps we need to understand what's important to them, right? Why aren't we spending more time understanding the preferences, the priorities, the attitudes, viewpoints, behaviors of these people, and actually using that as a vital evaluation tool in terms of what we buy and build going forward? And where AI has the potential to really make that access to that information more robust throughout all sectors of real estate, is that at some point, once you have enough actual human polling data, and I'm talking about massive amounts of data, similar to where we are on the track to get to, you will then be able to almost train the AI models to act as a digital individual, a digital human, right? Because one of the things that we do, and this really comes from our political polling days and what we call audience micro-targeting, is in our data lake, we're able to actually build these homogeneous renter segment populations, meaning anybody who falls in a particular segment not only looks the same from a geodemographic standpoint, but also shares the same psychographic characteristics, which means they value the same things and they behave the same way. And therefore, once you can train an AI model to understand what are those factors that cause people to behave or make decisions one way or another, you can actually use AI to create synthetic data to actually model even larger population sets downstream. And that is exactly where we're headed. But obviously, you always, always, always have to verify and validate that the AI model is actually being accurate in terms of how a real live human set of the population would behave. So even with the power of AI and what it could get to, you still need to verify and validate those outputs. And that gets back to my earlier point, which is you need to make sure that the data you're feeding into these models is the best data you can feed them with. Otherwise, you're going to get false reads. You're going to get, incorrect analyses out of the AI models. And that's something we're very conscious of. And that is why we go through the level of rigor, not only in terms of our sampling models and how we recruit people and the quality controls around all of the polling data. We even go so far as to, if you were taking our survey and you finished your survey, before we ever ingest your responses into our platform, we actually independently verify you are who you said you were in terms of where you work, where you live, what you live in, and how much you earn. Because if I'm asking you, what are you looking for in your next live space? And you tell me you're looking for a 2-bedroom unit and your budget is $5,000 a month for that unit, I need to be very certain that you can actually afford that. And so we have to go through some QCing processes before we ever ingest the data that comes out of the field into the platform. One of the things AI may be able to do downstream is actually, with the synthetic data, create a greater efficiency in that process. But that's to be seen. But we're very excited about the future applications of AI in the Rockerbox platform and the data models. It will certainly make things more efficient over time. We've even had some ideas for like the lease up side of the house, meaning the data module that deals with, you're about to bring the product to market, and who are your audiences that really matter to you, and where are they, and how many of them are there. But imagine being able to create a synthetic version of those audiences where you're able to actually test marketing collateral to see how they respond to that collateral and stimuli, but it's all in the AI world. I mean, that's where we could eventually get to. So it's a pretty wild time to be in the technology space, and we're super excited about what the future holds for the company.
Yeah, and another question, you mentioned that you guys are very careful with the people that you work with. And talking about your team, do you guys work with the internal team, technical internal team, or you work with some third party, like reliable partner? How that part works?
So we both. We're a bit of a hybrid. So coming out of the political world that myself and my co-founders came out of, political campaigns are run lean and mean. That is just the model. And even back for the 24 years that we ran Brightline, before we cannibalized the firm to build Rockerbox, we had always applied that same mindset to our staffing requirements. And so when we built Rockerbox, we obviously have a high level tech team that is really responsible for all the proprietary technology and intellectual property behind the platform, the analytics, and all those elements. But we also recognized that a lot of the programmatic elements that needed to be built into the platform could be done by a trusted partner. So we have a tremendous partnership with a group called Ignite, and they are
I
really
already heard about them.
Yeah, they're amazing. And it's funny, when we were doing the due diligence of who our development partner was going to be, I think we looked at 25 different firms, both onshore and offshore, and we whittled the list down to the three finalists. Two of the three finalists were actually offshore. One was in India, one was in Ukraine. And the third, being Ignite, just happened to be in our backyard of Washington, D.C. And quite honestly, we didn't choose Ignite because that they were in our backyard. We chose Ignite because they had a very interesting way of addressing some of the programmatic requirements of the platform that nobody else did. And they have been it's been a great partnership for us, and we look forward to working with them long into the future.
Okay, so thank you so much for sharing that. And we slowly but surely running out of time. So I have a couple last questions from my side. If our listeners will decide to learn more about your services, your company, or maybe they will decide to get in touch to work with you, how can they do that? What's the best way to contact with you?
Best way to do it is go on the website, which is www.RCKRBX.com. And on the website, there are various contact forms to schedule a demo, request some sample materials, etc. That is always the most efficient way to get in touch with us and be able to characterize what you really want to learn and know. So love to talk to anybody who's interested. I should also say, next month, we will be releasing publicly a nationwide renter demand index and data study, where we will hold several webinars to walk whoever signs up for them through the data. And so that's something else that you can register for online for that webinar, those upcoming webinars. So it should be pretty interesting for a lot of folks.
That sounds really interesting. Thank you for sharing your contacts. And that's already tradition at our podcast. The last question to our guest, that's kind of, what is the final statement would you say for this podcast?
I think the final statement is simply this, and it's really at the essence of why Rockerbox exists. For years, the real estate industry has spent most of its time and effort analyzing the past. We actually think you should see the future. And the best analogy I can give is if you think about driving to a new destination through a rearview mirror or looking through your windshield. And our data is all about the windshield, what's ahead of you, and understanding what's down the pike, and what opportunities does that future hold for our users through our data analytics to help them make better decisions, whether it's investment, development, marketing, all across the project spectrum. That is what we seek to help our clients do.
Listen, that was great. That was really great analogy. Thank you for sharing. So to our listeners, I want to say thank you guys to being with us. This was Michael Broder, the CEO of Rocker Box. Thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
I appreciate your time. And very soon we're going to launch this podcast. And after that, we're going to have another guest at the next week. So, Michael, thank you. Our listeners, thank you even more. Have a great day and ciao for now.